Alright, YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we are revisiting Final Fantasy VII Remake Revisited, which is a series they've been doing for the last, I guess, technically 18 weeks since they drop one a week, and we're on Chapter 18 finally. Now, we hadn't done one of these since early July where we had looked at like the first 3 chapters, because usually when it comes to these Revisiteds, there's not like a whole lot of new information to talk about, so you can't really make a video on each one of these, so that's why I was usually waiting for like 2 or 3 of them to release before we talk about it. But then we just kind of never did them again. But now we're on Chapter 18. And there is a couple things worth talking about with this Revisited. Also, it's the end of the game, so it's kind of important to look at this anyways, right? That being said, though, going forward in the next couple of days or so, next couple of uploads, we might just go through the rest of these really quickly and just kind of talk about them. Because I do remember looking back at them when they were releasing, I think 4, 5, and 6. Because I think I was planning on doing 3 at a time. Because that'd even out perfectly since there's 18 chapters. I do remember there being stuff that I wanted to talk about from each of those like ones that I looked at, and I probably looked at some of the other ones after that as well. So regardless, we might go back and look at these. Anyways, let's continue with the actual video. Anyway, so with this Revisited, they do talk about the Whispers, the ending of the game, the future for our party after defeating the Whisper Harbinger, and also they talk about how Motorball was initially a boss fight, but about halfway through development or so, they ended up adding in the Sephiroth boss fight, which I have some thoughts on. So let's just hop right into it. Why was the Motorball boss battle added into the motorbike minigame as opposed to being a separate boss fight in the original Final Fantasy VII? Was there ever a time when it was a separate boss fight? That is a great question. The original script written up by Mr. Najima actually had the last section of the game go from the Motorball battle to the Whisper Harbinger and finally the ending. Midway through development, we changed direction to make Sephiroth the final boss of this title and felt that having 3 boss fights in a row would spoil the tempo. Accordingly, we decided to use Motorball as a boss of the G-Bike section just before the final boss fights instead. So I do think this part was interesting just because I hadn't heard before that Motorball was ever actually a boss fight for Remake, at least initially, which is pretty cool because that's how it was in the OG FF7. And we'd heard a long, long time ago from Nomura, it was before Remake even came out, I think, maybe around the 2019 time, where he'd confirmed that Motorball was like a fight, but it wasn't the final boss of the game, which at that point we didn't know exactly what that meant because obviously Remake wasn't out yet. Which back then that was a pretty big revelation just because we only had OG FF7 to go off of, right? And the final boss that you fight before you leave Midgar is, of course, Motorball. So we knew we were getting something new. We just didn't know what it was. And it's kind of interesting that you initially were going to fight Motorball and then roll into the Whisper Harbinger. And at some point along the way, about halfway through development, they were like, we need a Sephiroth boss fight instead. And they changed Motorball from a boss fight to being a part of the motorbike segment. Which I think works out better anyways, because he's not much of a boss fight. And I just think that given what Motorball is, the type of machine that it makes more sense that we were fighting it during the motorbike segment anyways. So I think they did that perfectly when it comes to Remake. It also makes me wonder how the original ending was supposed to be for Remake, because if there wasn't initially a Sephiroth boss fight, then were we ever going to have the altercation between our group and Sephiroth within the Singularity? Were we going to have the Edge of Creation scene at all? Like, would that have still been there even if we didn't fight Sephiroth? It's kind of interesting to think about. But I want to pay emphasis on the Sephiroth thing just because I know some people have differing opinions on fighting Sephiroth at the end of Remake. We know that Remake was going to be a multi-game project, and the fact that we're already fighting the big bad villain with the first game was a little shocking to some people. But if you actually look back at OG FF7, we never fight Sephiroth, right? We fight Jenova that looks like Sephiroth, and then she turns into giant Jenova monsters. And then we fight the god versions of Sephiroth or whatever at the end of the game with Bizarro Sephiroth and Safer Sephiroth, right? We never fight the actual Sephiroth. So for that reason, I'm actually kind of glad that Remake gave us that just because OG FF7 did it. And for all we know, the end of Remake might be the only time that we actually fight Sephiroth that looks like regular Sephiroth, right? Because if we fight him again, it could be one of his god forms or a different form or something. Whisper, Reberum, Viridian, and Crocio seem to represent Kadaj, Laws, and Yuzu from Advent Children fighting to save their own future, referencing the entries that appear after using the assess material on each. Is this true? The Whispers are capable of forming monsters from all the memories in the flow of time, and I think that includes the characters who exist and will exist in the timeline as well. Now, this was somewhat a non-answer just because Toriyama didn't necessarily answer the question, but obviously that's what they are. I don't know why you wouldn't just say that, because that is what it is. They're clearly meant to be those 3 characters, especially given that Crocio uses an attack called Velvet Nightmare, which was, of course, the name of the gun that Yuzu uses in Advent Children. Now, in the early days of Remake, people did think that these 3 represented Cloud, Tifa, Barret from a future timeline, and that does still work just because of the weapons matchup, sword, gun, and fist, but it's the Velvet Nightmare attack that kind of gives it away that it's supposed to be those 3 from Advent Children. But also I like the quote of the Whispers being able to manifest monsters from the memories of the flow of time, whether that's going to be in the past, present, or future. And this is something we talked about somewhat recently where there's a level of potential time travel when it comes to the Remake story, right? Now, it's not time travel in the literal sense, like you're going to see Cloud and the gang hop into a DeLorean and go to the fucking future or the past or some shit. But it's more so that there is a flow of time that can be manipulated with the Remake story and universe, right? And you can take things from the future or the past and bring them to the present day, so why can't the reverse be done? That's why I think that time travel is a possibility with Remake. I'm not saying that's what's happening with the story. It is just a possibility. Next, the party are shown memories of the future as told in the original Final Fantasy VII. Was there ever concern that this wouldn't be obvious to fans playing Remake with no prior knowledge of the original FF7? Cloud and the team do not really understand what they are seeing in the scene where they are granted memories of the future either, so it is fine if the full meaning behind the visions is not communicated to the player. This I completely agree with. I think it makes perfect sense, right? It's confusing for our party, so it makes sense to be confusing for the player as well. Whether you're new or old, it's confusing, right? Because if you never played FF7 or any of the compilation, you don't know what the hell you're being shown at all in any capacity. And even if you are an older player, you're going to recognize all the scenes that are being shown, but you're at least left wondering, why is our group being shown these scenes? Or these future memories? Are the attacks Cloud uses on Sephiroth here meant to resemble Omnislash from the original Final Fantasy VII and later shown in Advent Children? What were the concepts behind the design of this heated battle scene? I will leave the actual names and background behind the techniques he uses here to players' imaginations. We did not envisage having a scene where Cloud and Sephiroth face off in a duel when we started the development, so we were very excited while making it. At the start of the scene, we deliberately made the camera movement similar to when the two fought the original Final Fantasy VII in order to make it reminiscent of the original game. Then it moves on to the action part, showing Cloud dauntlessly struggling against the all-powerful Sephiroth. We consulted with the sword fight choreographer who offered the opinion that because of the difference in the reach of their weapons, Cloud has little chance of winning if he tried to fight at a distance. Accordingly, we went on to choreograph it to have Sephiroth parrying and evading the attacks while Cloud continuously tries to press in and fight at close quarters. It may appear to be a fairly evenly matched contest, but Sephiroth is not actually being pressed very hard here. First off, I never took the duel between them at the edge of creation to be all that evenly matched because it's pretty clear that Sephiroth is just fucking with Cloud because obviously that's why he's parrying and blocking everything. If he was actually attacking Cloud, he would decimate him in this moment. But this is the type of behind-the-scenes stuff that I love to learn. The fact that it's not just like two video game sword guys fighting each other. Like they actually consulted with like a sword fighting choreographer on how this fight would actually go. And given that, Sephiroth's sword is goddamn massive compared to the Buster sword, like Cloud couldn't stay at range, which is why they have Cloud closing the distance. But kind of hopping back to something I said earlier in the video before Sephiroth was ever deemed to be a boss fight for Remake, like he says in this quote that they never even envisioned having Sephiroth and Cloud have a duel when it comes to Remake when they started development, which kind of further adds on to that like almost tacked on nature of the Sephiroth stuff at the end of the game. I think it works, it's fantastic, it's compelling, but like they never even envisioned him being a boss fight initially or having a one-on-one duel with Cloud, which means that if they were never envisioned a one-on-one duel with Cloud and Sephiroth, does that mean that the education stuff was ever initially there? Like, when did they come up with that? I'm also kind of curious why Toriyama wouldn't want to like reveal whether or not this is trying to be Omnislash at the end when they're dueling, what the names are, the background of these techniques that Cloud's using, almost like that's going to come up at a later point. It's important that Cloud is fighting Sephiroth in this way, so that's why he's not one to tell us. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Thank you for sharing your memories and thoughts of working on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Is there anything you would like to say to fans who have been reading this whole blog series? As it says at the end of the game, the unknown journey will continue, and Cloud and his friends will be on that journey for a while yet. From here on in, the Whispers cannot act to maintain the destined timeline, so fans can look forward to seeing what kind of future awaits the team. And this was the quote that was kind of making the rounds once this blog went live, because we have Toriyama here kind of insinuating that there's going to be differences going forward, right? There's no Whispers to make sure that destiny happens, but we get conflicting info from the devs all the time about this, about whether or not it's going to be the FF7 story that we're expecting, or whether or not there's going to be new stuff. And out of the two, it's got to be the latter, because there's no way there's not new stuff, because FF7 Remake had new stuff. It was still the Midgar segment, but plenty of new shit. And after the end of the game where we defeat Whisper Harbinger and we see what appears to be the ripple effect from defeating them, how can the story be the same, right? We're seeing Biggs alive, we have Wedge probably alive out there somewhere, potentially Jesse alive, and then of course Zack appears to be alive. So like there has to be some massive ramifications. And also just the concept of us defeating capital D Destiny, right? The physical embodiment of Destiny, and also them throwing up the unknown journey will continue at the end of the game. How can there not be new stuff, right? I know that we get conflicting info from the devs, but just if you play Remake, there's no way you can think that going forward, the story's going to be exactly FF7. And I point this out because it seems like just about every time we talk about there being new stuff in Remake going forward, or I guess Rebirth going forward, Remake Project, people are always like, well, the devs said the story's going to be the same. And it's like, yeah, but the devs also talk about or insinuate that there's going to be new shit too. So it almost doesn't matter what the devs are saying. And I just personally feel like there's got to be some major payoff to the last part of Remake, right? Like, if we defeat the Whisper Harbinger, and then there's not some new shit, it's like almost all of Remake was pointless, right? If us going through the effort of defeating Destiny, and there's no payoff to that, it's like, then what the fuck do we play that for? There's got to be something. We definitely had to read this last part too. It's not one of the questions from the blog, but it's just a final like quote thing from Hamaguchi that's really good. Thank you for sticking with us all the way through the blog series. The development team are currently hard at work on the second game, in which the story moves away from Midgar and expands out onto the world map. It is not just the story. I'll be working day and night to ensure that the game design also offers an even more thrilling ride and is packed with even more surprise than the first game. I'm very grateful for being given this opportunity to send my message out to all the fans. So obviously that quote's pretty nice, but the important part there is him talking about expanding out onto the world map, which he's talked about in the past before, because he's a co-director with Toriyama, but he's also programming and designing the game as well. He's the one that talked about before, like having to design the world map and shit like that, or design the world of Gaia. But I do think that Hamaguchi continuing to use terms like world map and talking about designing the world, the vastness of the world, expanding out from Midgar onto the world map, stuff like this does imply that there's going to be something besides the linearity that Remake offered, whether that's big zones, open world, whatever. And I'm fine with whatever they want to do. I just want the freedom to explore. I don't want to feel like I'm walking down a hallway like we were in Remake. And it's fine. Remake was in Midgar. It makes sense why it was linear. But I want to feel like I'm walking on a world map, right? It doesn't have to be to scale with an actual goddamn planet, an actual continent and shit. But just let me feel like I'm exploring a little bit, exploring the world. But my dudes, that is going to be pretty much the video. So, of course, pass it off to you guys. What are your thoughts on kind of everything, I guess, that we talked about within this video? But I guess specifically, your thoughts on them kind of adding in the Sephiroth fight and the duel between Sephiroth and Cloud kind of midway through development. Like, how do you think the game would have ended or been different had they not had that boss fight or that encounter between Cloud and Sephiroth? What was the ending initially going to be? And also let me know if you guys are interested in me going back and hitting the rest of the Revisited series. Either videos, that's the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you get a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you guys are interested in more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn notifications, follow me to _YG. I'm a Discord link, so notes are in the description and the outro later, guys. Try to do it all in one breath.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.